All right, some things have come out in regards to the UFC antitrust lawsuit, and I just wanted to share some thoughts on this because to me, this doesn't seem like the massive bombshells that the media are making it out to be, yeah? And before I get really deep into the weeds of it, I'm just saying that by pointing this out and calling out how this is not a huge bombshell, I am sure that there are going to be things that are going to come out during this antitrust lawsuit that are going to make the UFC look very bad. Or let me reword that, okay? Not just make the UFC look very bad. I am sure that the UFC have done shady business dealings in the past. But this video is about the things that have come out so far that the MMA media are making seem like this is a big deal. Like, look at this, Nate Diaz was being lowballed. Some fighters are being paid. Like, there are things dropping that are just huge nothing burgers, and we are going to go through them. And more so, if this is the best that they have in that antitrust lawsuit, they have got nothing. Like, the UFC is just acting like some regular, normal business. They have absolutely jack. Okay, let me rewind. Let's start with the things that are coming out. So far, all of this looks like it's just a bunch of communist losers on the internet that have never made $1 in their life. And obviously they haven't made $1 because they are just not understanding the basics of business. The first one that came out, the big bombshell, was from Bloody Elbow, which went around about a week ago, causing a little bit of noise, but enough noise to warrant this, which essentially shows that the top 20% of the UFC stars made 80% of the money, whereas the bottom 80% of the UFC stars made 20% of the money. And so what? There is no other business in the world that is structured like that. Like, we are in the sports entertainment business. We are watching sports entertainment. What movie do you have where the extras on set are making as much money as the star, like Robert Downey Jr., okay? Or just as much, or Johnny Depp, okay? What production do you have where in entertainment, where the guy, the gaffer, who is just duct taping things down on the floor so the stars don't trip over them, where he is making as much as the person whose face is on the side of the bus, whose face is on the billboard selling the movie? It doesn't exist, okay? In fact, like Bloody Elbow are the ones that posted this, and I wonder if the 18-year-old kid at the desk fetching everyone's coffee is making the same as the person that actually put this post out on Instagram. Or are people paid differently for how much revenue they generate, huh? And that's what annoys me so much about this. Like, it's Bloody Elbow putting this out there, and there are people in our industry that constantly attack the UFC and bring up examples like this. Like, I'm sure Ariel Helwani makes more than New York Rick, yeah? I'm sure that Luke Thomas makes more than his editor. How is this a win at all? And people want to relay this sport back to other sports all the time, like the NBA or the NFL. And this sport is nothing like those sports. These people are contractors. They can choose to train and live anywhere in the world. They can choose to spend as much on their camps as they want to. They're not locked into a city. They're not locked into one place where they have to live and train and perform for 80 plus games of the year, or they lose on their end of year payout. They are free to do what they like in between their fights. But let's draw the comparison for one moment, okay? Is the quarterback on the same pay as the kid sitting on the bench? Is LeBron paid the same as the kid sitting on the bench in basketball, or is he paid more, right? So the next thing that was going around this week, and this week, yesterday, I believe is when this one came out, is these shocking emails that were revealing that the UFC were trying to lowball Nate Diaz in 2010. Now, there are some things that I think are very interesting here. I think it's very interesting that this article came out when it did, while the PFL are in poaching negotiations with Nate Diaz. And also that many emails were leaked, but they chose to show, oh my God, look, they were lowballing Nate Diaz, okay? Now, Nate Diaz turned out to be a star, but you could count the kind of star that we're talking about literally on one hand. It would be Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, George Masvidal, maybe GSP. And I think you would be hard pressed to find anyone else in our industry that could generate the kind of revenue that at least those three could generate without a belt, okay? Now, people like to claim that Israel Adesanya is one of the biggest stars in our sport, but I do not think that he could generate the kind of revenue that those three could if he wasn't champion. So those three names are massive names. Nate Diaz is one of those names, but these emails were back in 2010, okay? That was a long time ago. Nate Diaz in 2010 was a very different MMA personality. If anything, his brother Nick Diaz was the one with the name. And all these salacious headlines seem to read that the UFC was lowballing, and the UFC were lowballing Nate Diaz in their initial contract negotiations. I'm honestly shocked anyone is surprised by that. All right, if anyone finds a business entering into contract negotiations with a contractor and they're lowballing their first offer, if anyone is surprised by that, like, have you never negotiated your pay? Yeah, like the person shocked by that probably has never negotiated their pay because they clearly don't have the brains to hold down a job. Like, obviously, the first offer is a lowball, genius. And then the emails go on to read that if Nate Diaz doesn't want to play ball with the UFC, they'll simply end his contract and the UFC will give him a tough guy on a prelim. Like, again, this is just normal practices, yeah? Like, picture any movie or TV show, yeah, that is phased out a character slowly over time when the contract negotiations were not going well and that character or that actor wasn't going to sign on for another season or more movie roles. They slowly phase them out and bring in a new character. Like, this is not a win. This is not a bombshell. This doesn't seem to be the moves of a big evil business corporation. This seems to be the moves of a normal business, okay? Secondly, there seems to be this idea, right, that Nate Diaz was getting lowballed. And I mean, Nate Diaz was being paid his market value worth in 2010. When you look at this story a little bit more, you'll see that Nate's initial argument back and forth with the UFC is that he was being offered a greater sum over at a different company called Strikeforce, which was later folded into the UFC. We're going to get into that in this video. And the UFC goes on to relate to Nate Diaz that he's actually being paid an equivalent amount, if not slightly more, when you take into consideration the bonuses that Nate had been paid throughout his previous contract. Now, I can completely understand where people are like, well, bread in the hand guaranteed now is better than bread that might be in the hand tomorrow. But you have to understand, the UFC is looking at it from exactly the same point of view. They want to know that this man that they're investing in is going to keep performing and going to keep winning, and they can keep selling him forward like any investment. They are simply hedging their bets. So you've got this company, Strikeforce, which is offering a certain amount of money, and then you've got this company, UFC, which is offering the same amount of money, but broken up into contract performances and win bonuses. There's a reason why one company stayed profitable and the other didn't. This is really what brings me to the crux of all this. All this antitrust lawsuit, it all seems to go off the idea that the UFC was so big and so powerful, it was locking fighters into contracts and they were not able to get other deals in other places, and it was essentially creating a monopoly, okay? In 2010, there were a number of other fighting organizations. Bellator was one of them. And at that time, these other fighting organizations would constantly try and outbid the UFC, but they did it running at a loss. Whereas the UFC was giving these fighters structured contracts that were competitive over time. So while other organizations were going out there just trying to outbid the UFC constantly, they were giving fighters these higher contracts, yeah? Like Bellator did it, Strikeforce did it, Pride did it, all in an attempt to outspend the UFC. They constantly tried to get the talent, and we're seeing that still to this day, where companies do not understand that it's not how much you pay the fighters, it's not even how much talent you accumulate that is whether or not a company actually makes bank and makes profit. It's how well you can tell the fighter's story and how well you can market those fighters for your company to turn a profit on those fighters. You need people to spend more money watching those fighters than you spent acquiring those fighters. It's so not hard, but there are literally entire companies that do not understand this in the fight world. It blows my mind. And if the UFC was such an evil monopoly, then how come there were so many other companies around offering fighters other contracts like Strikeforce and Bellator and Pride at higher rates than the UFC? How come there are now new companies, PFL, One Championship, Ryzen, offering fighters different contracts to the UFC? How is it a monopoly when there's other contracts offering other fighters more? It's just the landscape, because the UFC structures their contracts where they keep these fighters and retain them in a way that it continues to make money, while all these other companies just keep hemorrhaging and losing money. We have seen this all the time. Bellator literally just gave itself away to the PFL. They transferred their shares over, and the PFL is still hemorrhaging money. It has not turned a profit. One is still hemorrhaging money. It has not turned a profit. So yes, Strikeforce, Pride were eventually acquired by the UFC, but Strikeforce did it because it was running at a loss. Pride was shady as hell. It was run by the Yakuza that got exposed, and it started running at a loss. And rather than these fighters just going ahead and being unemployed, the UFC stepped up and bought the company when it was going under. These fighters still had a job. If the UFC is a monopoly, how come it allows these other companies to grow up around it? Like, One Championship still exists, PFL still, I've gone over this. Like, it's not a monopoly, it's just better at structuring fighter contracts. Not a single other fighting company can actually turn a profit, can actually return money to its investors, which is the point of a business. Like, it can not only turn a profit, return money to its investors, but it can provide facilities for its business partners, which are the UFC fighters. Yeah, it gives them the Apex. They can use the gym there. They can use the meal prep at the Apex. They can rock up to the Apex 3 or 4 weeks before their fight, and the UFC will give them free meals so they make sure they rock up on weight. They will give them doctor's checks to make sure they're healthy to start the fight. Like, they get doctors before and after the fight. That is all for free because of the UFC's profits. And and this is the other thing that people get so annoyed about, is how much profit the UFC makes. It makes billions of dollars. But how come Jeff Bezos is allowed to make billions of dollars while the delivery guy gets the standard market value for being a delivery guy? How come Elon Musk can be a billionaire while the factory workers at Tesla get paid regular factory prices? Well, how come Trump can be apparently a billionaire? Who knows? But how come Trump can be a billionaire while the sheet cleaners at the hotel get paid just regular, normal hotel wage? Like, this is just normal business. This huge antitrust gotcha for the UFC is just normal business practices. It's so weird to me. It's so weird to me that people claiming this is a big W. Like I said at the start of this video, if more things come out, I am more than willing to be swayed on this, and I expect more things to come out. I don't think you can be a business in the fight world for 30 years and not have shady practices in the past. I think there is something there that took this business that was running bankrupt in 2002 when Dana bought it, off the top of my head, but there is something there that took this business when it was bankrupt to like an ESPN partner $1 billion TKO company. I'm sure there is something there. But so far, what we have seen drop, these big, wow, look how evil it is. Have you ever made money? Have you ever made any money in your life if you think this is shocking? I just don't know. I don't know. Maybe someone please help me. Explain it to me. Like, what we've seen so far, what is so evil about it? I don't understand. Let me know down in the comments if you'd enjoyed this video in any way. If you're still here, still watching it, then maybe I've made you think. You might have to agree with me, but maybe I've made you think about it from a different perspective in some way. So if you could go ahead and click that sub button down there for me and continue to watch these videos coming up on your screen, see if you like them. If you don't like them in the future, that's fine. You can always unsubscribe. That's all good with me. And thank you so much for watching this one. I will see you all in the next video.